Hey, welcome back, everybody. We got a little change of venue going on today, but we are moving
at
right
war.
along. Yeah, we are at war now. The date that will live in infamy has occurred. December 8, 1941, President Roosevelt meets with the joint session of Congress, and he says, "We will attack the Japanese Empire and her allies."
Wherever they may be found, or some phrase like that.
Something along those lines. But again, this is it. We're at war. We are ready to rock and roll. And where are we going now, Jim?
Well, we're gonna get our heads kicked in for a while.
Shoot.
We got rope-a-doped with the Pearl Harbor thing.
Yeah.
And we were really not ready for a war in the Pacific, especially.
Yeah. Well,
You need a lot more boats because it's a big place.
you're looking from California to China. What? Almost 800 or sorry, 8,000.
8 to 10,000.
8 to 10,000 miles. Oh my goodness.
And it's a big, and it goes north to south. I mean, the Pacific Ocean is so big, it's hard to make the comparisons with the Atlantic.
Right. Well, the Pacific, you can actually stick all the continents into it.
Yeah, that's right. That's true.
So
That
I
is
think
true.
I think that's a good understanding of how big it is.
Yeah, it's just monster sized.
So it's December 8.
And the Japanese are going. I don't know that I've ever heard of like an operation name.
I don't think so either.
I'm sure they had one,
Yeah,
but I just never heard it because they go after Singapore, Hong Kong,
correct.
the Philippines,
Right.
Guam, Wake. They are going to town trying to knock us out, but not Hawaii. To me that's
Well-
an interesting thing they just missed. How many troops? I know Hawaii's defended. That we had a understrength division, and we had some coastal fortifications. But how hard would it have been after Pearl Harbor to land troops in Hawaii? Well, in Oahu.
Well, I don't think it would have been that much of a in my personal opinion, I don't think it would have been that hard had the Japanese just kept rolling.
Right.
They could have easily have taken over Oahu, and beyond that, what would have stopped them to taking the rest of the islands?
But do they need ports?
I don't think so.
Because they don't have like the cool amphibious stuff we pull out.
Right.
You know, with the drop down ramps
Right.
and machine guns and backing up.
Then
We had
again,
such great boats.
you're right. They did. We'd had some wonderful pieces of military equipment in that, but did the Japanese need those?
Well, to land on Oahu against the
Sure.
resistance.
Right.
But
yeah.
they did land on Wake and Guam without any difficulties.
True.
I think it was Wake took a couple waves before they. But then, again, small detachments of
Right.
Marines or soldiers,
Right.
limited amount of ammunition, no support, no hope of support.
No.
And it's just a matter of time before it's over. And so most of them don't take but a couple days. The Philippines, of course, much bigger.
Well,
Takes
yes,
a while.
and you have over 1,000 islands in the Philippine archipelago, I guess you could call it.
Yeah.
And that's
You'd think they made the dressing, but that's not there.
But again, you see too much. You see too much space between these two areas. Hawaii.
Well, we
and
can't
Wake.
even fly to the Philippines.
No.
Not straight. We have to stop and keep.
Right,
Yeah, see,
refueling. Yes.
So there's no hope for the Philippines really either. Not with the fleet out of action.
No. And again, like we mentioned last time, the big saving grace here, of course, was the fact that those aircraft carriers were down in Panama.
Right. So we're not defenseless.
No. But are we at 100%?
No.
Not even close.
We definitely don't have the initiative.
No.
They're getting to choose when and where we fight.
Right.
And that will continue until what? April.
Right.
Before we ever have any chance to do something, any counter punches.
True. and so we will get to that here after a little bit. But again, this after effect of Pearl Harbor, you see such a change. You see how people are now being affected with this war. We saw it on the horizon. It's not like we didn't know something was coming. It's just we didn't know when.
Well, four years prior, we had that little batch of war fever.
Right.
After the rape of Nanking.
Right.
But we got over it because we're Americans, and
We had bigger things
too
to-
far away, and we had a depression to worry about.
We had too many other yeah, exactly. We had too many other things to worry about. We weren't going to get involved. We didn't want to get into something like, again, World War I, where we were not ready. We did not have the defense mechanisms. We did not have really anything to keep us afloat, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
But again, we do have some of those, like you said, small detachments around the Pacific, but the Japanese, again, they're just hammering us left and right.
They're going all out. They definitely full offense.
For sure.
Because they're not just attacking us. They're attacking the British in Malaysia, in Hong Kong. They're attacking the Dutch East Indies.
Right.
They're launching an offensive in Burma.
Right.
They are just going for a knockout blow. Again, going with Yamamoto's theory. If they can win the war quickly, they have a chance, because otherwise things start getting hairy.
Very quickly as well.
They just don't have the oil reserves. They don't
No.
even taking the Dutch East Indies because they took so much damage.
Right.
And they don't have a lot of refineries.
No.
Back then it was just oil wells.
Right.
Load it onto a boat, send it home to the refinery to
Right.
make it into gas or diesel or whatever it needed to be.
Right. But again, even if they had been successful here in the Dutch East Indies or in Malaysia or Singapore or whatever the case may be, that they're wearing themselves a little thin too.
Well, yeah, they are. It's kind of like in football. They're jailhouse blitz. Everybody's coming. You got like two guys back there going,
Yeah.
please don't get a touchdown.
Right. Please do not make it over the head of my defensive lineman.
But it's an all-out offensive, and it's very successful. Hong Kong falls.
Sure.
Isn't that a Christmas, I think?
Somewhere around there, yeah.
Singapore, same kind of thing. They march an army down the Malay Peninsula,
Right.
which the British said they couldn't do. Of course, the British said a lot of things about the Japanese that may have been a tad racist.
Sure.
Like, they have slanty eyes, so they can't be good pilots. I'm thinking if I was the Japanese, I'd drop an extra one down their smokestack for that.
Oh yeah,
And they do.
for sure.
They bombed the British fleet in the Far East to smithereens.
Sure.
Which is not a loss that the British could take. That was kind of their reserve.
Right.
If they needed something in the Atlantic, they'd take it from there. Now it's gone.
Well, and again, you think about it. We see now more and more that the British are showing their hand, that they're not invincible.
Well,
And,
talk about overstretched.
right.
They're stretched all across the globe, and they're being attacked
Right.
all across the globe.
Right. And yes, they may have these troops coming from India. They may have these troops coming from Burma, but not many.
No, not enough for sure. And so we all get to take it on chin. The Philippines takes a while, of course, because it's big.
Yes.
Manila doesn't fall until, I want to say, early April.
Right.
The Jewel of the Orient has now
Right.
fallen into Japanese hands.
And again, the thing is that we see a more people. There are more military personnel on the Philippines because we've kept a large amount of our army.
Well, a full division plus their divisions. We train
Correct.
Filipino divisions,
Correct.
which turns out to be a very good thing in the sense that we have an underground working, kind of like the French resistance.
Sure.
The Filipino resistance
Sure.
was active throughout the war.
Right, and one very important person there at the Philippines was General Douglas MacArthur.
Oh, do the Dougie?
Yeah. Well, Arthur MacArthur,
Yeah.
which is really weird, his son's name,
Yes.
Arthur MacArthur.
Arthur
I don't know,
MacArthur.
yeah, weird why you do that to your son, but Douglas and his family, they will flee by that March, April of
42.
42, and
Well, because they're down to a little island out in the Manila Bay,
right,
which is not going to hold out long because it's going to get hammered by artillery as
Exactly.
soon as the Japanese get their heavy stuff up.
right,
It's just going to be rocking and rolling.
and this is again where we see that famous line, "I shall return."
Right, he leaves on a PT boat.
Yeah, and he says, "All right, hey, take care."
Yeah, I shall return.
Yeah. While hundreds, if not
Thousands.
thousands.
Well, we'd already had thousands taken prisoner.
Correct.
And-
Was it Bataan fell around March, or somewhere around that area, and that's where again we start to see the Bataan.
Well, they decide they want to move the prisoners away from Manila,
Yes.
because Manila, of course, is the center of the Philippines. Even today, I'm sure the people on the other islands dislike it. Probably like Texans in Lubbock don't like Dallas, but it
Well,
doesn't change anything.
No.
But it's still, that's the center of the Philippines, and there's a lot of pro-American Filipinos there.
Right.
So let's get them away from there. But in typical Japanese fashion, they do not provide anything for the trip.
No.
It's just a death
Walk.
march.
It's literally just
Walk. If you fall down, we bayonet you.
If you
If
don't
you
keep
stop,
up,
we
right.
bayonet you. Because they get in trouble, possibly even beheaded if they use a round of ammunition on Americans.
Right.
Which probably tells you how bad their supply situation was.
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of like that sneak glimpse into, why would they say that unless they were really short of ammo?
Right. Well,
But again,
that's-
they went full offensive.
right.
Well, you're going to spend to the limit.
when you're literally selling the house,
Yep, they pushed all their chips into the middle and said, "Let's do it."
you're putting a lot of eggs into one basket. So
Yes, you are.
so what after? What next?
Well, this death march, of course, is brutal. I can't remember how many survivors, like 11,000 out of...
It's around 25,000 that started, and yeah, you're right, about that 11,000 that will make it to.
And it's not just
the
Americans.
POW camp.
It's also Filipino
Right,
soldiers as
right.
well.
And again, when we talked a little earlier about the rise of the Japanese, there is this sense of course, racism, and the Japanese are no different of wanting to destroy not only the American presence but also the Philippine resistance.
Yes, to bring them into the coast prosperity sphere, as
Right.
their propaganda called it.
Right.
But but you add this racism that's endemic in Japanese society at this time, especially,
Mm-hmm.
that they are superior. I mean, they have a god as an emperor. How can they not be
right,
superior?
Right.
And then you add on top of it this mutated Bushido, especially in regards to Americans, but other Asians as well.
Mm-hmm.
If you're caught as a soldier, you're expected to have died instead of surrendering. So if you've surrendered, you're the lowest of the low. They can do anything they want with you,
Right.
and they proceed to prove it.
Yeah, there are a lot of atrocities that are occurring here, not only along the march, but when they get to those POW camps.
Oh yeah, that's the POW camps make anything that we would see in Europe for American prisoners.
Correct.
And British prisoners, not
Right.
not the Russians and not the Jews or anything.
No.
Not the concentration camps, but the
No.
prisoner of war
Right.
camps,
Right.
the Stalags. They just makes everything. They're more reminiscent of Andersonville.
And that was a terrible
the prisoner
POW
camp in Georgia, and I
Right.
can't remember the name of the one in Chicago. It was it was exactly the
right.
same way.
I agree.
Just
I
absolute,
cannot remember the name either,
you know,
but yeah.
do
you're
not
right.
cross lines,
Right.
and things like that.
Well, that's where we get that term deadline from.
Yeah,
Right.
you go over here, you're dead.
Mm-hmm.
So, the Japanese are showing themselves, watching the TV show, The World at War.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, I don't know, a 12 or 15 part miniseries that covers the whole war.
Right.
But they have cool video that we don't have.
I
But one of the
wish.
things is they had a videotape of these Japanese guys. I can't remember where it was originally, but they showed them on video doing the bonsai.
Oh, yes.
It is a victory. It's a victory cry.
Right.
And they would play that after, like, they showed the map, and it was like Hong Kong Falls, bonsai, and the Singapore Falls, bonsai,
Malaysia Falls.
bonsai,
Bonsai.
Manila Falls, bonsai. And I was like, it was just a really good descriptor. I mean, for the Japanese people at this time, their own sense of superiority is, well, this just makes sense.
Yeah. We should be the ones taking over all of these areas.
We destroyed the American fleet at Pearl Harbor, and we crushed the British fleet. We can just do anything we want.
Yeah.
And there it is. Where it's happening.
Mhm.
The only thing that's holding up is Burma,
Yeah.
because it's just a bunch of runs of mountains and jungle.
Right.
So
Mm.
you're not going to make a lot of progress there.
Yeah. A little foreshadowing into another fiasco of American. But
Yes.
we'll go there later.
Yes.
Um,
It's but that head of steam starts to slow down.
yeah.
And I'd never really thought about that before, but that they would possibly get court-martialed, which meant probably beheaded, like on the
Correct.
spot,
Yeah.
for firing a bullet at somebody in the Bataan Death March. Kind of does. I never really thought about it as kind of an indicator of how much ammo they probably don't have.
Well, yeah. I mean, you have so little of resources already because of the spreading out of all of your people. What are you to do in a factory that can barely produce enough to keep its workers going?
Well, good point.
But anyway,
And the interesting thing I found about, well, the fall of all these places, Dutch East Indies, is of course there were a lot of Americans taken prisoner,
sure.
but not just Americans taken prisoner and put in prisoner war camps, but Americans who lived in the Philippines, nurses that worked at the hospital.
Yeah.
And one of the things I've read is that both in the Dutch East Indies and the Philippines, which are the two that I've read about, the nurses were never molested by the Japanese. But when you look at like how they acted towards the Filipinos, how they acted towards the Chinese,
Right.
it was rape, loot, and pillage.
Right. Which that's interesting to think.
And it's interesting because a lot of the I don't know what percentage, how it's split between these radical Bushido individuals and professional soldiers.
Mm-hmm.
But there were several professional generals in the Japanese army. Now, they still would have been like made Patton look like a love kitten in their attitudes.
Right.
But you didn't do things to non-combatants like nurses.
Sure.
And, it's not honorable to do something to women.
Good
And
point.
so,
Good
in
point.
those areas of command, it just didn't happen.
Yeah.
Because, of course, the punishment is, they're, what they call those, their punishment details are brutal.
Oh, sure.
I mean, you're basically wearing a diaper and carrying a rifle and running for 15 hours kind of stuff.
Until you fall dead.
Yeah, they just, they sweat you really hard
Yeah.
when you get in trouble in the Japanese army, assuming they didn't kill you.
Right. More than likely, they probably would
Beating up recruits was a normal order of the day
Sure.
to show them discipline.
Mm-hmm.
It is very reminiscent of what you hear about the armies of the 1600s in Europe.
Right.
The lack of real training, and it's all about spirit, which, to be honest, the Europeans were still using in 1914.
Uh-huh.
Because the spirit was going to get through that wall of lead that machine guns were putting out, and that didn't work
Right.
out as well.
No.
Oh, foreshadowing for the Japanese tactics in combat, really.
Right.
They're not really that good at it.
No.
It's surprising. But then again, who have they fought that's been a quality opponent?
No one.
No one.
Really.
For the last 10 years they've been at war, they've been fighting disorganized, corrupt Chinese governments.
Right. That, again, if you come up against a resistance movement, it's usually something of a, maybe 50, 60, 70 years behind what the technology you had.
Yeah. I mean, I think for the most part the Chinese had given up front-loading cannon, but they didn't have a lot of cannon to begin with.
No.
But yeah, if they had anything that was better than much more better than World War I quality, it would have been shocking. And they had a lack of it. So the Japanese were always one-upping.
Oh, yeah.
First the Russians,
the
then
Russians
the Koreans,
were,
and then
finally
the Chinese. And of course, at the early parts of this war, outnumbering the Americans, who are surrounded and isolated, it reinforces that belief that they are better.
Right.
And so it's going to be a while before we see that change, that attitude of other.
Right.
Japanese are going to have a very difficult time seeing themselves as not the superior on the battlefield.
It's thinking about it and thinks in terms of like anything. If you get PUD battles, and you're easily winning,
Mhm.
your confidence boost is going to be there. You're going to have the mentality that I can never be destroyed.
Until you're destroyed.
I'm sorry. Your luck is going to run out eventually. It's no different than anything else, you know.
You probably see the same thing at what Napoleon at Austerlitz.
That's a good idea. Yeah.
I mean, you see that kind of that pride of doing a good job and being good at what you do, growing into an arrogance that nobody is as good as you.
Or Alexander the Great, for instance.
Yeah, for that matter.
The fact that he, you know, he's conquering these people over and over and over throughout Europe and the Near East, and
for the same reason, technologically, he was superior.
Right.
His troops are armored,
and he had battle tactics that were far beyond what the average person would have.
It was a multiplier.
Yeah.
You take this technological advantage, you add tactics, and suddenly you're running roughshod over them. And I'm sure a Japanese general, as bad as some of them were, could run over most of the Chinese generals who probably were only generals in name.
Wait, there's a battle here? What? I didn't know about that.
Somebody should have told me.
Yeah.
So it's a matter of degree.
Right.
And like you said, if you're constantly fighting these opponents who, for whatever reason, can't beat you, professionalism, technology, terrain, it builds a false sense of security and confidence that could hurt.
Right. Because eventually the Japanese luck will run out.
Right. And of course, America is living up to Yamamoto's thing back home.
Oh, yes.
The wheels of war begin to turn, and we see this this almost complete switchover. I mean, there are no 1942 models of, well, there are 1942 models of cars because they all come out in fall of 41.
Correct.
Which I've never understood.
Yeah,
but anyway.
you're right. But the idea that the understanding that the United States, we have to switch. We have to now go from a consumer production line to now a defense production line.
And it's a total war theory.
Right.
The rationing goes into play almost immediately. Sugar and rubber and shoes and all sorts of things are suddenly rationed. Flour,
everything.
And, you know, like good Americans, we always had a good black market going.
But, yes.
I mean, for the average citizen, you knew you were contributing to the war effort because you didn't have things that you were used to having.
Well, and
you couldn't go get new shoes for little Tommy because you only had a coupon for one pair a year.
Exactly.
And little Tommy had decided to go into his monster growth spurt and go through his shoes like...
Yes, like they're literally going through his shoes.
Yes.
You know, and I know my grandparents... they remember going through that idea of the rationing. I'm sure your grandparents were the same way.
I don't remember them mentioning the rationing much. They were older.
Sure.
They would have been late 20s, hadn't had kids yet, which is
That's
made them
very
rare
surprising.
people. Well, they were poor because of the Great Depression.
Right.
They got married shortly after the Great Depression really got going.
Well.
But both my grandfathers went to war.
Mm-hmm.
My grandfather in Kansas went to Texas
to
guard against the invaders that were going to come from the Gulf of Mexico and swamp Texas.
Yes.
He was there for about 6 months, and they discharged him.
Oh, okay.
He was, again, older.
Right.
And so they sent him. He went home and worked in an aircraft plant.
There you go.
In Wichita. Built bombers.
Yeah. And what about your other grandfather?
My other grandfather went into training, became a demolitions expert with
that's correct.
4th Combat Engineers.
Yes.
So he went to Europe.
Right.
And we'll talk more about that when we talk about other things that I know about his story, because he never told me any of it.
Right. Well, and kind of going in along the same lines, my grandfather, he was I think he was around 16, 17 when Pearl Harbor happened. And so he was kind of that urging of let's go and get them and let's destroy this and avenge this death of what happened at Pearl Harbor. He lied about his age,
which happened fairly frequently.
A lot of those men did,
because they didn't draft below 21.
No,
at least not in 1942.
But they
would take
up
volunteers below 21.
Right, and so again, a lot of men, right around that 17-year-old, maybe senior in high school, wouldn't finish high school. They'd go and they'd join and. Well,
or as soon as they finished high school, they were gone.
That was that.
They were gone.
And that was the way of my grandfather. He was 17. He went into the Marine Corps, and he fought in China, and again, we'll talk more about that when
Yeah,
we get there.
when we get there.
But again,
And it was, there was a picture. We used to have we go to church down in Platte City, Missouri. It was a little farming community at that time. Pretty much all the men of age got in the same truck.
Yeah.
And left together. Right. Some of them were reservists, some of them weren't. I know here in St. Joe, a lot of people had been convinced to join the Marine Corps Reserve because they had a great softball team.
Oh my God!
So they became Marine Corps Reservists, which, in 1939 seems like a great deal. You get to play softball with your buddies. You get paid for your weekend.
There you go.
It wasn't as good as it is today, but still, it was, it's an extra job in the middle of the Depression.
Oh, you would be happy.
That's a bonus. And you get a good softball team, so how could you be going wrong?
Right.
And then suddenly December 7th happens, and the big green machine says, come on home.
Yep. Yep.
So, the stories are, some of the stories I heard, guys out hunting, they didn't know about Pearl Harbor until they got home that evening.
Mm-hmm.
Just, it changed life in America.
Almost overnight.
Well, overnight, there was a sense of fear.
Right.
If you ever seen the movie, what is it, 1942?
Yeah.
I mean, it's meant to be a comedy.
Right.
But it has such a huge element of truth in it that they were waiting for bombers to hit California.
Correct.
The fact that nobody had a bomber that could do that.
No, but you know what? We were still afraid.
We were very afraid, and when people are afraid, they get angry.
Yes.
And so America got angry, and suddenly they turned everything. We didn't make cars, we didn't make dishwashers, we didn't make a lot of those cool things that people have been trying to build for 30 years in factories, and suddenly we're building tanks and rifles and airplanes beyond count.
Oh my gosh, the number of bombs that were built in munitions plants, the tanks that were being just rolled off the line, the airplanes that came out, every minute practically.
Probably.
Yeah.
I mean, if you ever get a chance, I'm sure there's some I know there's good, because I've used them in class, good YouTube videos on like the Liberty ships and production, where these, I mean, you just see that, you look at this factory and it just seems like the line of planes goes on forever.
Well, and yeah.
And, there are little skeletons way down there. Down here it looks like a plane.
Right. And it's like literally just, you take it right out of the factory and boom.
It's still
it can
shiny.
And it can be right up in the air, right as that rolls off, which again is amazing. We don't see this from any other major nation in the war.
No. Britain tries. But then again, they're also under bombardment.
Correct.
And they have limited supplies, so sometimes factories don't work because they don't have anything to build with.
Right.
The Germans, intriguingly, were a very different group of people. Mm-hmm. After the fall of France, they what do they call that? They sent home a good chunk of their army.
Really?
Really. Like over 1 million men. The guys who had jobs in things like factories, those craftsmen, things like that, they were sent home because we'd won the war.
Aha.
But then, of course, early 1942, they get called back up, or early 41, they get called back up because of the invasion of Russia, and then after that, it doesn't ever happen. The Germans never put women to work like Americans did. The British did to a certain extent, but America just said, like,
you're
come here, June Cleaver.
Yup.
You're going to work, and
trade your apron in for coveralls because we need it.
The interesting concept of that, though, is, I mean, that's the story of World War II from the home front.
Right.
Women going to work.
Right.
But it really didn't change percentages of women who worked outside the home.
No.
During the Great Depression, and even before, the number of women who worked part-time jobs outside the home was large, really.
Especially with your lower or middle class.
Yes. And, well, really, to be middle class was to be a man who had made enough money his wife did not have to work. That was a goal.
Yeah. But it didn't.
But World War II changes. This is the first time women are working full-time, overtime.
Right.
Earning more money than their parents probably ever made by themselves.
Right.
This is going to change America in the 60s. More than the 50s, which is strange.
Yeah.
You would think that would be like an immediate flip over, but most of the women that went to work in World War II went home and had babies after the war. But that's getting ahead of ourselves. But we see the same thing in the 20s, too.
Correct.
Women, the flappers and all that women's lib of the 20s.
Correct.
It doesn't look like women's lib to us, but it's close.
Yeah, but it is very much...
if they got pregnant, they got married and settled down and had kids.
Correct.
There was no other mindset.
Right.
And you have to wait a generation to see the changes.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, America gets angry, and they get so angry they ask a really crazy guy to do something special.
Oh boy, who are we talking about?
Jimmy
Oh.
Doolittle.
Oh yes, Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle.
He's,
And now this is a good story
it's a great story, really.
because
It makes
again,
a good movie. It's got what, 2 movies? It's in 2 movies.
Yeah,
30 Seconds Over Tokyo and
Yeah.
Pearl Harbor.
it's in
finishes
Pearl Harbor.
with
It's at the end of Pearl Harbor, which of course that is a very long film. But again, think about this. This is the first retaliation
yeah.
against the Japanese. We've been getting our heads just smashed in with a massive rock.
We're like Rocky.
Yeah. But again, we're thinking, how in the world is this possible? A guy taking bombers.
Bombers. What, B-24s, 25s?
I think B-25s.
That sounds right.
Regardless of it, these are not things you would usually see on an aircraft carrier. And that's how he did it.
Oh yeah, the videos of them plowing through the seas with these huge bombers. They just look so big compared to like watching fighters take off.
Correct.
It gives you an idea of the proportional differences between bombers and fighters really
Right.
quickly.
Right. And so we find this is the interesting thing about the Doolittle raids. So it's April of 42. We've built up, we've got all this plan together, and then
But we don't really have anything yet.
no.
Because ships take longer than that to build.
Correct.
And, our Air Force, yeah, we were building airplanes, but we don't have pilots yet. We got to train them too.
Yes, you're right. But the thing of it is, again, continuing with that crazy notion of going and attacking Tokyo, actually bombing the heck, well, maybe not bombing the heck out of them, but bombing them in a retaliatory...
Letting them know we were there.
Yes.
Because they bombed, what, 5 cities?
Uh-huh.
I mean, so it's not just a let's get Tokyo. It's a... Militarily, it can't really do much.
No.
You've got, what, 20-some bombers involved?
Mm-hmm.
And you're spreading them out over 5 cities? You're not going to do a lot of damage.
No, but again, it's that, hey, listen, we're here, and you pissed us off.
And we're not surrendering.
No.
Just in case you had your hopes set on that, we're going to come to the peace talks.
Correct.
It's not happening.
But the thing about it is that the pilots, they understood that this was a one-way mission.
Right. Well, the plan was for them to get to China.
Correct.
And the fuel
Hopefully.
numbers were getting just to China.
Yes. You were not making it back.
You're not. Well, there's nowhere to go back to because the
Correct.
carriers have to turn around and run.
Right.
Well, that was the plan.
Right.
But it turned out the situation made it even worse because they ran into, wasn't it a fishing trawler
Yeah.
that saw the carriers?
Right.
And it was like at the very, very outside of their range.
Right.
And
so
the thing is, you say, well, they just send the bombers up and blow up the ship. But they couldn't land the bombers on the carriers.
Right, yeah. And that's the deal. Like, you weren't able to, they were barely able to get off of the platform of the ship.
Especially those ones in the front.
Oh, my goodness, yes.
That would have been terrifying.
Oh, I would not. I would hate to have been a pilot on that. Oh!
Luckily, they did have, what, like 30-mile-an-hour headwinds?
That's a good thing. That is a good thing.
Nice.
But again, it was, like we mentioned, this is a one-way mission. Most of those that do make it in and reach the cities of over Japan and they fly on into China, they're met with resistance. Japanese are already taken over much of northern China and have set up.
Right. They've got areas that they're supposed to aim for, but navigation is not a GPS thing then. It's literally a guy sitting there with a watch and a compass.
Correct.
And marking lines on a map. It looks really cool, like in Memphis Belle, the movie. He's like making these perfectly straight lines.
Yeah.
I'm like, I doubt it.
No. You got turbulence and you're just like, oh, come on!
We're going... If we got
Yeah.
a side wind of 15 miles an hour, what does that do to our course?
Oh, yeah.
You don't
it's
know
terrible.
until you get there.
Right.
Or
right.
not.
Right, exactly.
But again, because they have to launch at the very, very edge of their range,
I know.
that means when they get to China, they're not going, they're like coastal China.
Yeah, it's oh, wait, we see land.
And so if you had an engine that was running a little bit less efficient, you weren't making it.
No.
You were going down to the Sea of Japan or,
Right.
or the Yellow Sea.
Right. And again, this what can we, in lack of better terms, it is almost a suicide mission.
Yeah, it's designed for them to survive, but the number of crews that survive is pretty low. Because so many of them just disappear over the ocean, or
True.
they go down in Korea, which is all Japanese.
Yeah. And, but the effects of this is what most people should understand about this.
Right. We sacrificed 20 planes.
Right.
And some crews that would have been nice to have probably later. But in the grand scheme of the air armadas that we build,
yeah,
it's a pittance that we spend.
Correct.
To really just, what's it, the Hornet?
Yes.
To send this carrier up there to really just let the Japanese know we're not getting out of the war.
Right.
It lets the Japanese civilians, because like they hit 5 major cities, not
right.
just Tokyo.
Right.
So the whole country knows that the Americans are fighting back.
Right.
It doesn't really change their attitudes in a great deal. Probably more if the bombs landed closer to home.
Sure.
You know,
sure.
If they drop one across the street on your neighbor's house, you're like,
oh, yeah.
That's serious.
Hello.
But in America, the propaganda value of this victory, which is why there's so much video of it.
Of course, yes. Yes. It completely changes
yes.
our system, and it changes our way of understanding that this is a war that we must win.
Yes, well, not just that we must win, but we got a victory. We bombed Tokyo.
Yeah.
And the same thing happened in Europe.
Right.
When the RAF bombs Berlin.
Right.
Fairly early in the war, relatively speaking.
Mm-hmm.
Just to show that they could.
Right.
They don't do it very often because they lose a lot of bombers doing it. Just like we lost. I mean, well, statistically, we lost 100% of the planes we sent. We never got them back.
No.
I mean, I'm sure there's a couple sitting in museums in China.
Sure. But again, we don't have them.
We don't have them, and we couldn't use them in the war effort.
Nope.
But our carriers survived.
Yeah.
And came home, which is important because we didn't have any to spare.
No, we did not.
Because those were the only striking power. But so here we are. It's April of 1942.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Manila has fallen. Corregidor's about to fall,
yes.
Technically.
Yes.
But it looks bleak. I mean, we are definitely in the third round of the Rocky movie where he's taken about 14 blows to the head, and he's yelling for Adrian already.
Yeah.
And it's just it's bad. And that's, I guess, where we're gonna have to leave you because there's a whole lot going on.
Ooh, yeah.
And this war stays dark for a little while.
It does.
It's just not one romp to victory.
No.
That's
no, it's
definitely not. Well, the British would tell you that. They've already been at war for 2 years.
Right.
They know it's not a romp to victory. They've already been bombed and blitzed and
destroyed everywhere.
Retreated.
Yeah.
I mean, they've done it all. So
yeah. So anyway, be sure tune in. We've got a lot of good content coming up.
Oh yeah,
and
the war's gonna get exciting.
Yes. Yes. So
exciting.
Again, make sure that you pay close attention to the next couple of episodes.
There we go. Good night.